Newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney met with US President Donald Trump for the first time at the Oval Office, where
The May 2025 meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Carney represented a critical moment in US-Canadian relations during a period of heightened tension. Their first face-to-face encounter in the Oval Office blended diplomatic courtesy with underlying friction, particularly when discussions touched on Trump's provocative comments about Canada potentially becoming a 51st US state. The meeting largely focused on trade issues, a natural focal point given Trump's aggressive tariff policy on Canadian goods, including automotive products, lumber, and energy resources. While Carney pushed for relief under existing trade agreements, Trump maintained his hardline stance on duties, reflecting his long-standing America First approach to international commerce. But what made this diplomatic exchange particularly noteworthy was how it illustrated the balancing act both leaders needed to perform. Trump had to demonstrate strength to maintain credibility with his domestic supporters, while Carney faced the dual challenge of defending Canadian sovereignty, while not completely rupturing the relationship with Canada's largest trading partner. Since February 2025, the Trump administration has imposed a series of punitive tariffs, up to 25%, on key Canadian exports, citing unfair subsidies and America First imperatives. Auto tariffs alone threaten to disrupt integrated North American supply chains, with Canadian vehicle assembly heavily reliant on US parts, prompting warnings of factory slowdowns on both sides of the border. Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada and a political newcomer elected in March 2025, campaigned on a platform of standing up to US pressure and protecting Canadian jobs and sovereignty. His first state visit to Washington was designed to reset relations after phone calls in late March produced no concessions on tariffs. Carney touched down at Joint Base Andrews on the afternoon of May 6, 2025, greeted by the Canadian ambassador and US protocol officers. The formal motorcade processed down Pennsylvania Avenue amid tight security, reflecting both the importance and underlying tension of the visit. Inside the Oval, the decor blended American flags with a single maple leaf banner discreetly placed behind Carney's chair. Advisors from each side, U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai and Canadian Ambassador Kirsten Hillman among them, took seats at side tables, prepared to interject with technical details. Despite warm smiles exchanged at the start, an undercurrent of rivalry was palpable. Moments into the meeting, Trump quipped on Truth Social, "We give Canada free military protection, and we don't need much from you. Maybe it's time you join us as the 51st state." The remark, delivered with a trademark grin, drew polite laughter from the room, except from Carney, who leaned forward and replied firmly, "Canada is not for sale, nor ever will be." Trump countered casually, "Never say never," underscoring his willingness to provoke for leverage. Carney then shifted to trade, noting that Canada is the U.S.'s largest trading partner by export value, sending over $1 trillion Canadian dollars worth of goods across the border each year. These duties aren't protecting American workers. They're punishing consumers and undermining factories on both sides, he argued. Trump rebutted, "We want fair deals, not free rides. If Canada wants our market, they'll give us a deal that works for America." The two men agreed to reconvene tariff discussions under the USMCA framework in late summer, but without immediate rollbacks. Carney outlined proposals to update the US-Mexico-Canada agreement to cover digital trade, climate standards, and supply chain resilience. He suggested a joint working group to iron out new chapters, aiming for a ministerial meeting at the upcoming G7 summit in Alberta. Trump responded that any updates must favor American workers, and hinted that Canada might need to reduce auto tariffs further in exchange for digital trade concessions. Turning to security, Carney proposed enhanced North American defense ties, particularly in Arctic surveillance and cybersecurity coordination. Trump agreed to continue Operation Northern Shield, a joint effort to patrol Arctic waters, but conditioned future cooperation on Canada agreeing to purchase more from U.S. arms manufacturers. During a follow-up exchange with the press, former President Donald Trump was asked about the status of the USMCA trade pact. He responded with a dismissive tone, signaling that while the agreement remained in place, it was not central to current U.S. trade strategy. He described it as functional and useful for certain objectives, but made it clear that future revisions, or even termination, were on the table in the coming year. In a striking shift of tone, Trump took aim at past Canadian leadership, making veiled criticisms of a former Canadian official, widely believed to be Chrystia Freeland. He accused her of damaging the original USMCA deal by attempting to take unfair advantage during negotiations, asserting that this caused a breakdown in trust and led to the deterioration of relations during his prior administration. Prime Minister Mark Carney, standing beside Trump, responded with a more diplomatic tone. He characterized USMCA not as a fixed agreement, but as a foundational framework that would need to evolve. According to Carney, certain elements of the pact were being exploited through the way tariffs were currently applied, and as a result, adjustments would be necessary. He emphasized the need for future talks to reshape the agreement and address emerging economic realities. The exchange highlighted a key divergence in outlook. While the U.S. viewed the agreement as a leverage point, subject to unilateral interpretation, Canada regarded it as a treaty that required balance and revision. When asked about Carney's earlier criticisms during his campaign, particularly his claims of American betrayal, and whether the U.S. would retaliate if Canada reduced its imports of American goods, Trump appeared unconcerned. He downplayed the economic interdependence, suggesting that Canada was far more reliant on U.S. trade than vice versa. He also pivoted to the strength of U.S. manufacturing, especially in the defense sector, asserting America's dominance in military exports and noting Canada's purchases of U.S.-made equipment. Within hours of the public session ending, U.S. stock indexes slipped, S&P 500 down 0.4%, on investor concern that no tariff breakthrough would dampen corporate profits. Canadian markets were mixed, with the TSX financial sector under pressure as banks worried about cross-border trade slowdowns. In Ottawa, Carney's firm's stance earned bipartisan praise and boosted his approval ratings, with one poll showing 62% of Canadians approving his handling of the visit. In Washington, Trump's base applauded his tough talk, viewing the meeting as proof he would never cave to foreign interests. Although some GOP senators privately expressed frustration at the lack of concrete concessions. Carney's hints at diversifying trade toward the EU and Asia-Pacific signaled a potential realignment if U.S. tariffs persisted. European Commission representatives later welcomed Canada's interest in strengthening CETA ties, viewing it as a counterweight to U.S. protectionism. Both sides committed to follow-up meetings. Carney and U.S. Trade Representative Tai to convene technical talks in Ottawa and cabinet-level discussions at the G7 summit in Alberta later this year. Yet with domestic political calendars heating up, midterm primaries in the U.S. and provincial elections in Canada, the window for compromise may narrow. The economic stakes were significant but not catastrophic. Markets showed concern but not panic. Both sides left, agreeing to continue discussions later in the summer, essentially kicking the can down the road without any major breakthroughs or breakdowns. The Trump-Carney meeting blended protocol with pointed exchange, a statehood jest countered by an unwavering defense of sovereignty, and trade proposals met with entrenched tariff positions. Neither leader secured an immediate victory, but both reinforced their domestic standing. Trump as the unyielding protectionist, Carney as the resolute defender of Canadian autonomy. The summer's USMCA modernization talks and the Alberta G7 gathering will test whether theatrical headlines can give way to substantive deal-making, or whether US-Canada ties remain caught in a cycle of brinkmanship. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more.